Hello everyone and welcome to a new video about the Tesla update. As usual, let's talk about Tesla today. There's a lot to talk about, a lot to discuss, and a lot of potentially good stuff here, so let's just talk about it. Let's get right into it. If you enjoyed, don't forget to hit the like button as it dusts off a lot. This is not monetary guidance. I am not a financial advisor, and my YouTube membership section is currently live. The link is below, and for just $2.99 a month, you can access all of my thoughts, ideas, and so on stocks. Today, I added one for Apple. I did a little bit of a PayPal one here, but I also did a little bit of Apple here somewhere. All in all, if you're interested, the link is below for just $3 a month. With that said, let's just get started as there is much to discuss. Tesla closed the day once again, regrettably down about 2 on the day compared to the market. This may be a slight underperformance, but nothing significant, at least relative to earlier. Okay, my mind is just, I've been staring at chess a little too long. Honestly, I feel like, so let's get the bad news out of the way first, because there's a lot more potentially good news I want to talk about, but let's just get the bad news out of the way first. Let's get the potential bearish thesis, if you will, bad stuff out of the any. So let's talk about this first and foremost. Well, we did finally go down below the 200-day moving or 200 moving average. On the weekly, obviously, there's still 2 more days on the week. The candle is not finished, and that's important. And that's an important thing to consider with what I'll say after this, but the candle has not closed. There's still 2 more days, but as it stands right, this absolute exact moment on the weekly, it is of course looking a little bit questionable, right? Closing below the or not closing so far below the 200 moving average, below the trend line as well. Looking a little bit suspicious, right? Definitely looking like it wants to shake out some people. But like I said, there's still 2 more days, and this to me right here is probably the most bearish thing you can think of, right? Thank God. The squeeze indication hasn't chosen a direction yet because it could have had a negative impact on this down. It is still showing a red circle. The current trend hasn't been all that great, but overall it's beginning to seem a little strange. But as a bull, at least you know that you want Tesla to close at least somewhat above 218. To put it another way, I would say that Tesla should close at least somewhat above the 200-day moving 200 moving average, which is 218.5. The market is currently at 218.5, so you should ideally be closing at or above that level. However, in my opinion, that is the most bearish thing you can think of, and things could get really bad if we can't find a close that is essentially above 218 to 2182 this week. Basically, by Friday's end, things may go wrong. That is a bit of a warning shot that the downtrend may have just started, really, so take that into account, right? But let's talk about what could be the good news, and there's, in my opinion, a lot to talk about here, because Tesla is doing some pretty interesting things here. So let's go to the daily. First and very quickly, so obviously we have, let's get the obvious ones out of the way that we've been talking about for quite a while. RSI oversold, and today, of course, it got even more oversold. Obviously, every time it sees these kind of levels or even lower, it's bounced pretty much every single time with a pretty substantial bounce. There's still technically more room to the downside. It doesn't have to go all the way down to these levels to bounce. But it can, but point I'm trying to make is this oversold stochastic. Let's bring that up. Where is the stochastic? Should be down here somewhere, same concept, pretty much oversold. But it looks like the blue is finally trying to cross the red, pretty potential, good sign there. I'd like to see that. So those are like the super obvious ones, right? The mag is essentially played out as bearishness here, right? How much more bearish can it really gets, honestly, right, without at least some bounce? Where is the pivot? Oh, not the pivot actually is weird. Like it had the signal that kind of reset. So I'm not really sure what happened there. I haven't used this indicator enough to really understand why it, did that. But, take that for what it's worth. We're still hugging the red line of the Binger bands, right? Obviously, as I always say, more often than not, it reverts back to the mean, which is pretty much sitting at the very low 240s, do mean it has to happen tomorrow. But we're often than not, every time we've been hugging the red line, it will always eventually return to the minna. The question is not if this will happen, but when. However, given what I'll say shortly, I don't think that will be the case. Instead, I think we may have found a bottom. I'm just sort of clearing up some housekeeping before we really get into the juicy and meaty information. But that's really the important stuff for now. Let's get into what I think are the juicy and meaty information. Let's quickly return to the weekly chart. Their tenure is something I specifically want to bring up. Regarding the weekly chart, right before today's close, the weekly candle was red. And as you can see, they are essentially pumping towards the end of the day. One interesting observation is that up until this point this week, these 4 weekly candles here 1, 2, 3, 4 are all red. You can probably see that. And as I mentioned earlier, prior to the last 15 minutes of the day, this one was also red. However, if you zoom out and look back over the past 3 years in Tesla's trading history, you will notice that there have never been more than 4 red weekly candles in a row. Or, to put it another way, there haven't been 5 in a row the last time. This is equivalent to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 6. This is like 7. There were obviously a lot more back in February of 2019, and when I checked, I might have missed something. But as far as I know, there have only been 4. If we could move up here right now, there's like 1, 2, 3 here, 1, 2 here. Okay, so this one could be the closest, but 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, right? There has never been more than 4. There has always been a pause. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, the point I'm attempting to make is that it has never been 5 or higher in a row other than the 4 that we have already had. We may also print a white weekly candle, or perhaps white-green in this case. But then way back in February of 2019, take that for what it's worth. That's what I wanted to say about the weekly. Let's move on to the daily and discuss a few very important points. First, as I mentioned earlier, we did technically break down, but once again, one candle does not indicate a trend, so this could be a false breakdown. Secondly, I want to bring up very quickly that the market has seen a lot of false breakouts and downs. For example, Tesla had a false breakout up here, broke out, returned. But it wasn't a successful retest. It broke right back down into it. Clearly Netflix, I mentioned numerous times that the Disney false breakout soared back up after the false breakdown. Many people that I saw posted their bullishness on this candle. Breaking out appeared to be bullish, but when you check back in there, you see a false breakout on the other side. PayPal, rather lovely. Full breakdown, same concept, right? Broke down below the V, pretty much came right back up and back into the H, the amount of false breakouts and breakdowns I'm seeing lately in the market is pretty ridiculous. I don't know what the hell is happening with this market. Pretty substantial. Who's to say that Tesla isn't about to do the same? We'll see now, so that's one of the things I want to say right there. Now, one thing that's interesting that I want to mention very quickly is going to be the options flow. This is not something I usually bring up very early, but this is pretty important. So we have a lot of small flows here, but the main one I like to look at obviously are whales, this one right here. As you can see, 3.9 million in premium 212.5, puts expiring 26th of January, or in other words, next Friday you might be looking at this initially and thinking, wow, that looks pretty bearish, right? That looks pretty darn bearish, but remember how I said I wasn't sure if this chart is able to distinguish. I was genuinely unable to. I did re-enter my shares. I bought back my cash-secured puts that I had sold for a profit during the week at, about 2 on 13. Now that I'm sitting and waiting, this seems primed. Like I really could not ask for a better-looking situation to get at least some form of reversal. If we get confirmation tomorrow, we'll talk about where we might be able to go, but it looks good. It also has a beautiful hammer candle off this potential. There may be a little bit of a drop sense, but the flow on QQ is pretty bullish, man. I mean, some bearish, but overall, I think there is more bullishness than bearishness. So anyway, long video, I don't want to make it much longer than this, but the idea is that this appears to be the bottom. It truly does look like that. Naturally, everything carries some risk. There's always a risk involved with anything. However, this appears to be this H. It must be, at the very least, a temporary bottom, at the very least, a short-term minimum. That's all for the video. Thank you for watching, and as always, I'll see you tomorrow. Peace. Ladies and gentlemen, please share your thoughts below. I'm hopeful, really hopeful, that this is looking good, and I really want to see what tomorrow brings, if it's a green day and ideally even a gap up. It's looking good, man, it really is. And I think that this is at the very least a temporary bottom, if not potentially a bottom. We'll see.